The wind carried dust like old regrets, sweeping through the town of Welton with the hush of things long buried. It was late afternoon, that silver hour when shadows stretch thin, and everything golden turns brittle at the edges. Callum Hayes stood with his back to the warped post of the saloon porch, arms crossed, boot resting on a half-crumbled hitching rail, watching hell take the shape of an auction block. He hadn't come to Welton for trouble. He hadn't come to save anyone. But some things find you no matter how far you ride. The sisters stood still on the platform, 3 of them side by side, stripped of hats, gloves, and dignity, like they'd been plucked from their home and set under glass. Each wore a faded calico dress cinched tight at the waist, their only protest, perhaps, against the spectacle of being sold. Ada, the eldest, had hair the color of pine wood and a calm in her eyes that unsettled men more than tears might have. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared out at the gathered crowd like she'd memorized every cruel face. June in the middle had fire in her posture, arms crossed tight, jaw locked, lips drawn in a snarl she didn't bother to hide. And the youngest, Sandra, barely grown, with a sunburned neck and trembling hands, clung to the hem of her sister's skirt as though she could vanish if she touched it long enough. Callum's jaw tensed. He'd seen cattle auctions with more decency. At the side of the platform stood the woman responsible. Stepmother, they said. Widow Langley's second wife. Callum didn't know her name, and didn't care to. Sharp as a pickaxe, skin like bleached parchment, and a voice as sour as unripe apples. "She's startin' Ada at $30, someone muttered near Callum. He turned. 2 ranch hands in dusty hats leaned against the saloon railing, half-drunken, chewing dry tobacco. "She don't look bad for a spinster. Bet she'll fetch good coin." Callum's gaze drifted back to Ada. She looked straight ahead. Not proud. Not ashamed. Just unmovable. He felt something then, not pity. Something older. A tired kind of fury that sat low and hot in the belly. "Quiet." The stepmother snapped. "I'll not have whispers ruining a decent sale. These girls are legal wards. No father to speak of. Their time's up and their upkeep's done. Take it or leave it." Callum took a long draw from his flask, then tucked it away, jaw working. He'd heard rumors the Langley patriarch was dead. Died slow from fever on a failed claim near the Dakotas. But rumors were liars, same as people. And what kind of woman sells her husband's daughters like stock? Ada shifted slightly, and her gaze caught Callum's. Just for a breath. Just long enough to see that he was watching. He didn't look away. The bidding began. Sparse at first. A drunk offered 20. The general storekeeper nodded at 35. A cattleman with sweat-stained sleeves and missing teeth raised to 45 for June, laughing as he did. Sandra had yet to be priced. Some folks whispered she'd be better off left behind. Callum exhaled, slow. Thought about the last town he rode through. A widow crying over a child buried in an unmarked grave. Thought about his mother, whose hands shook after every winter, who'd begged for firewood with frost on her cheeks. Then he stepped off the saloon porch. Booth heels thudded over dry earth. The crowd parted just enough to let him through. A few men narrowed their eyes. They knew him. Or thought they did. Long hair, sun-leathered skin, a scar under his left cheekbone like a red thread that never healed. He wasn't a preacher. Wasn't a lawman. Just a drifter who smelled like horses and dust. He stopped in front of the platform. Looked up. "I'll take all 3, he said, voice low and calm. The stepmother blinked, lips twitching. "This ain't a package deal, stranger. I'm not haggling. I'll pay what you want." His hand dipped into his coat and came back with a drawstring bag. It hit the platform with a solid clink. Silver dollars. A handful of gold. She stepped back. "You're out of line. There's procedure. Bidders." "I ain't bidding." His voice cut through the air, not loud but sharp. "I'm freeing them." Gasps whispered like wind through tall grass. The sheriff leaned off the wall, hand near his hip. A few men chuckled nervously, waiting for a punch or a bullet. The stepmother leaned forward. "You got no right." "I got every right," Callum said. "You're sellin' what ain't yours. These women got a father. He's still breathing. You didn't wait long enough for him to die, that's your trouble. Thomas Langley is dead. No, Callum said, he ain't. He's sick. Got word from a trapper near Fort Ray. Man's clinging on, asking for his girls. And you were too busy counting coin to hear him. June's mouth parted. Ada took a step closer. Even Sandra raised her head. The sheriff finally spoke. You sure about this, Hayes? Callum turned. You gonna stop me? I ain't stoppin' you. Just a skin if this is a rescue or a marriage proposal. Neither. Callum glanced back at the platform. A man's got the right to deliver a message. And the right to right a wrong if it's happenin' in daylight. For a long, stretched moment, no one moved. Then Ada stepped down off the platform. She didn't run. Didn't flinch. Just walked toward Callum and stood beside him. June followed with a sideways glare, daring anyone to speak. Sandra hesitated. Then Ada held out her hand, and the youngest reached for it like a bird being coaxed from a cage. Callum tipped his hat to the sheriff. We'll be out of town before sundown. And without another word, he turned and led the sisters to his wagon. The sky was softening toward lavender. Horses snorted in their hitching posts. Somewhere, a baby cried, a dog barked, and a shop door slammed. But for a while the world felt very still. At the edge of the road, Ada paused. Looked over her shoulder at the town. At the crowd still blinking in the dust. Thank you, she said. Soft as wind, but true. Callum gave a half nod. Ain't done yet. He helped them into the wagon. Tossed the bags. Took the reins. They didn't ask where he was taking them. Didn't ask what he wanted. Maybe because he hadn't looked at them like they were debts owed. Maybe because he hadn't looked at them at all, not like men usually did. As the wheels creaked forward, Ada leaned back, wind lifting strands of her hair. June sat with arms crossed, still ready to fight. Sandra nestled between them, watching butterflies chase each other beside the road. Behind them, the town of Welton faded into shadow. And beside her, Ada glanced sideways at the man with sunburnt hands and silver in his stare. He didn't smile. But he didn't need to. Some men come to a town to start fires. Others come to carry the ashes home. And though Ada didn't know where the road would end, she knew, deep in the hollow of her chest, that something sacred had just been interrupted. Not destroyed, not broken, just paused long enough for hope to breathe again. The wagon turned north. The wind changed. The road north was slow and littered with silence. Callum didn't feel it. He drove the wagon like a man working off old sins, steady, eyes fixed on the horizon, hands loose on the reins. The sisters sat behind him in a row of worn quilts and travel-wrapped baskets, quiet but not frightened, not anymore. Fear had long since dried up in them. What remained was something colder. Endurance. The morning after the auction, they'd left Welton without farewell or fanfare. The sheriff had watched from his office, arms crossed, saying nothing. No lawman interfered with a man doing right, not when the sky was clear, and the town too cowardly to help on its own. Callum stopped at a fork in the trail, under a crooked juniper, and let the horses breathe. He climbed down without a word, checked the wheels, refilled the canteen from the creek that ran clear beneath frost-glazed stones. Ada followed after a time, steps sure but soft. She didn't speak right away. Just stood beside him, staring at the creek. How far? She asked finally. 3 days if the weather holds. He handed her the canteen. And if it doesn't? 4. Maybe 5. Ada drank, then passed the water back. Her eyes didn't leave the trees. Is it true? She asked. About our father? Callum nodded. Far as I know. He's sick. Some say dying. But he sent for you. Ada swallowed hard, though not from grief. I didn't know he sent for us. We thought he was gone. That's what she wanted you to believe, Callum said. Your stepmother. She gave no name to the woman, no protest. Just silence, heavy and rooted. Back in the wagon, June muttered under her breath, still simmering from the day before. Don't make no sense. If Pa was alive, why didn't he send a man? Why send a trapper with word, not come himself? Maybe he couldn't ride, Callum said, climbing back up. Maybe he figured word would be faster than legs. Or maybe he don't want us anymore, June spat. Maybe he thinks we're ruined. No one's ruined, Ada said, voice low but clear. We're just tired. Sandra, curled near their feet with a knitted shawl drawn up to her nose, asked, Will he know us? Ada didn't answer. But she laid a hand on Sandra's hair, slow and firm. Callum glanced back once as they continued. The youngest girl had the look of someone who had never known a world with choices. That haunted him more than anything. By the second day, the road grew thinner, less traveled. Pines gave way to scrub. Coyotes cried from hills that hid more bones than settlers. Callum didn't tell the sisters, but this stretch had been dangerous once. Raiders, bandits, starvation. But now it was just empty. Too many ghosts had already taken it. They stopped before sundown. Not near a town, not near anything, just an open patch by a flat stone, and a river that whispered like someone praying. Callum set up the fire. The sisters collected sticks, built the bedrolls, boiled beans. It became a rhythm with no questions. Not because they trusted him, but because he didn't ask for trust. He just worked, and worked quietly. That night, June finally broke. Why'd you do it? She asked him, halfway through the meal. You ain't our kin. You could have walked away. Callum didn't look up from his plate. Could've. So why? He shrugged. Didn't sit right. Watching that happen. I've seen a lot of wrong out west. Learned to walk past most of it. But this felt like a crack in the world. June scoffed. You think you saved us? No, he said simply. I think you were worth more than you were being sold for. That's all. June wanted to stay angry. But anger, when answered gently, doesn't know where to go. So she fell quiet. Later, when the fire burned low and the stars came out like silver seeds scattered by a giant's hand, Ada sat beside Callum on the edge of the stone. She'll come after us, she said. She has pride. She won't, Callum said. She has reputation. That's what she's more afraid of losing. Still, Ada said, you bought us. I paid to end something, he replied. Not to own anyone. You don't owe me. Ada studied him in the firelight. His hair gleamed gold at the ends, his jaw unshaven but clean-cut, eyes shadowed but not cold. He didn't wear righteousness like a badge. He just wore weariness like an old coat. My father, she whispered, more to herself than to him. He was kind once. Carved us toys, sang when he thought no one heard. Then he changed. After Mama died. Callum stirred the fire with a stick. Grief makes cowards of men. Or monsters. Sometimes both. I don't know what he is now, she admitted. I don't know if I want to know. He looked at her, really looked. Then why ride north? Ada hesitated. Then, because even broken things deserve the chance to finish their stories. The third day, Sandra fell ill. Not badly. A fever, maybe nerves. But her cheeks turned red and her breath short. Ada soaked cloth in cool river water, and pressed it to her forehead, while June chewed at her nails and threatened the sky. We should stop, June said. Let her rest. We stop now, Callum said. We lose the daylight. There's a cabin ahead. Half-day's ride. It's safer than camp. You said 3 days. I said if weather holds. This ain't weather. This is chance. Ada watched him, weighing him. We ride, she said. We ride careful, and we stop when it's worse. Not before. Callum gave a nod. No arguments. The wagon rocked gently as they moved on. Callum didn't rush, didn't jostle the road. He gave her the reins once so he could ride beside on horseback, letting the weight ease from the team. That night, they reached an old station shack, long abandoned but solid enough. A roof, a hearth, a door that could close. June started a fire. Ada warmed broth. Callum checked the windows and fixed what he could with hammer and nail. As the night deepened, Sandra's fever broke. She lay still, damp with sweat, eyes blinking open just enough to find her sisters. Then she smiled, barely but real, and drifted to sleep. June cried, alone in the corner. Ada stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. Callum stepped out, holding a tin cup of coffee. "I've got no right to ask," Ada said, voice soft. "But is he really still alive?" He offered her the cup. "He is. A man near Fort Ray swore it. Said Thomas Langley sent him, sick and near dead, to find his girls." Ada held the cup, didn't drink. "Why you?" "I was nearby. Had coin. No land. No past worth speaking of. And now—" He glanced at her. "Now I've got a wagon full of sisters who don't trust easy and a promise to deliver." She almost smiled. Almost. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the ride. Not for the silver. Just for not looking at us like we're broken." He didn't answer. Some truths don't need ceremony. Inside, Sandra stirred in her sleep, murmuring names from childhood. June folded her arms, forehead pressed to the wall, listening. The fire flickered low, casting shadows that swayed like dancers against the cracked walls. And outside, under the stars, a man and a woman stood close. Not in romance, not yet, but in a quiet kind of reverence. A place where something fragile had room to grow. Tomorrow, they would reach the ranch. Tomorrow, the father would rise or fall. But tonight, Callum knew the price of freedom wasn't just coin or courage. It was patience. It was choosing not to run, even when the world gave you every reason to. And in the hush of midnight, with the wind rustling pine, he felt, for the first time in years, that he was standing somewhere he was meant to be. Not as a hero. Just as a man trying to keep a promise. And that, perhaps, was enough. The wagon rolled onward through sagebrush country, where the road blurred into little more than a line of ruts stitched between distant hills. Mountains rose faint and faded in the north, like promises half kept. The sun overhead burned soft gold, not yet cruel, and the wind brushed the tall grasses like fingers through old hair. Time seemed slower here, or maybe it just stretched longer when no one filled it with talk. Callum sat high on the driver's bench, reins loose in one hand, the other resting on his thigh. He'd said little since Sandra's fever broke. No need to. The sisters had settled into their own rhythm. Ada beside him in quiet alertness, June restless as a bird in a cage, and Sandra still curled under quilts in the wagon bed, half awake and humming to herself, the tune like something from a cradle long gone. They passed no towns. No signs. Just the sun, the wind, and the long road between what had been and what waited. By midday, the trail curved along a dry riverbed. Callum slowed the team and glanced to his side. "She's sleeping." Ada nodded. "Not fevered, just weak. Her color's better. She's got grit." "All of us do," she said softly. "We had to." He didn't press. That was the thing about Callum. He never asked for stories, but he listened like he'd already heard the shape of them before. Behind them, June let out a sharp sigh. "How much longer?" "2 more days," Callum answered without looking. "If the trail stays kind." "It never stays kind," June muttered. "It always breaks something before it gives." Ada didn't scold her. She just reached back, touching her sister's knee in quiet reassurance. Callum caught the motion and filed it away. These women had learned to survive each other the way soldiers did. Through proximity and grit, not ease. That night, they camped in the basin of a dry valley, where wildflowers still clung to the shadows. The fire cracked slow and low, sending sparks into a velvet sky. June did most of the cooking, bitterly but well, while Ada tended Sandra's sleep. Callum strung a line of rope from tree to tree, and hung tin pans to catch wind as warning bells. He wasn't afraid of animals. Men were quieter and far worse. After the meal, June sat with her knees drawn up, head resting on her arms. "I had a plan," she said suddenly, to no one in particular. "Before all this." Ada looked up. "What kind of plan?" "Get married," June said. "To someone dumb and rich. Get out." I was gonna smile so pretty and talk so sweet he wouldn't even notice I hated him. Ada said nothing. "But I waited too long," June continued. "Got older. Got plainer. Then Mama died, and she came in like a sickness, and suddenly we were just things. Just mouths she didn't want to feed. Callum didn't interrupt. He just watched the fire. June turned toward him. You ever lose anyone? His eyes stayed on the flames. Too many. Some I loved. Some I didn't realize I loved until they were gone. That answer quieted her more than sympathy would have. Later, after they lay down, Ada remained awake, sitting upright with her arms wrapped around her knees. The moonlight lit her profile pale and fine like carved bone. Callum stirred the fire and looked over. You never sleep, do you? Not when someone's gotta watch the night. I'm here. You'll sleep too. I don't sleep much, he said. Not real sleep. Ada didn't ask why. Didn't offer comfort. She just nodded like she understood. After a pause, she said, I used to dream about a house. Just a little one. 2 windows, a door that doesn't creak. Nothing fancy. He didn't laugh. That's a good dream, he said. I stopped dreaming after Sandra got sick the first time. Before all this. She almost died. June was too angry to help, and I was too young to do it right, but I tried. I sat up all night with her and told her stories I made up on the spot. She remembers that, Callum said. Ada blinked. She does. Last night in her sleep. She said, Tell me the one with the bluebird and the snow. Thought it was just fever talking. Ada turned her face toward the dark. It was real. The story. I made it up so she'd believe something beautiful could survive winter. Callum looked at her for a long moment. You do that for everyone, don't you? What? Make them believe something beautiful can survive. She shook her head, but there was no denial in it. Only the weight of someone who'd carried others too long. The next day dawned hard and dry. Wind picked up from the south, rattling the wagon cover and throwing dust into every crevice. The trail turned rough, snaking along the edge of a rock shelf, and the horses spooked at every gust. Callum's hands were firm on the reins, jaw tight, scanning the ridges like a man who knew what could go wrong and how fast. Halfway through a stretch of jagged descent, the rear wheel gave a lurch and cracked. Hold on, Callum muttered, reining in. The wagon groaned to a stop. He jumped down, inspected the damage. The outer rim had splintered, not beyond repair, but enough to halt them. We'll need to camp early, he said. I can fix it. Just need a few hours. June kicked the ground. Of course. Ada climbed down without complaint. She lifted Sandra gently and carried her to the shade. Callum watched the way her arms shook, just slightly, as she lowered her sister to the blanket. He noticed, but said nothing. By dusk, the wheel was mended and the fire built again. The horses were calmer, the sisters quiet, and the air cooler. That night, Ada sat beside him again. The quiet between them was familiar now. Not empty. Just deep. You're not what I expected, she said after a while. What did you expect? A man with that kind of anger, hair too long, voice too low. I thought you'd be cruel or careless. You're neither. I've been both, he said. Not proud of it. But I'm not clean. I'm not looking for clean, Ada said. I'm looking for true. Callum's mouth curved slightly, more weariness than amusement. True's a hard thing to keep hold of out here. She looked down at her hands. You're not riding us north just for honor. No. Then why? He stared into the fire. Because my mother once gave a boy bread and clean water when his own folks turned him out. She said, kindness should be a road people can walk back to. Ada folded that sentence into herself like a letter meant to be reread. They didn't speak again that night. The next day the trees changed, greener, closer, more alive. The air tasted like pine and damp earth. And for the first time, the trail felt like it was leading toward something rather than away. Sandra sat up straighter. June smiled once, almost shyly, when a fawn darted across the road. And Callum, for all his silence, looked a little less like a man outrunning ghosts. As they crested a ridge just before sunset, Ada leaned forward, peering into the valley ahead. There, she whispered. That's the place. Callum nodded. "We'll reach it tomorrow." She said nothing more. But her hand, resting on the edge of the seat, stayed near his a second longer than it needed to. And though he didn't touch her, didn't even glance her way, he felt the warmth of her presence like a steadying thing, like a memory beginning to bloom. Behind them, the road stretched long and dusted with sorrow. Ahead, a father waited. Not for forgiveness. Not for answers. Just to see what remained. The cabin appeared through the trees like a memory returning. Weathered wood. A porch sagging on one side. Smoke trickling faintly from the chimney, as if the fire inside had been burning slow and steady for far too long. No fences. No livestock. Just wild growth curling around the steps, like nature had nearly taken it back before someone remembered to live. Callum pulled the wagon to a stop at the edge of the clearing. The horses tossed their heads, impatient from the climb, but quieted under his firm hand. He sat still for a moment, watching the front door. "It's real," Ada said beside him. Her voice was soft, steady, and beneath it, something trembling. He glanced at her. "You ready?" She didn't answer. Just stepped down, her boots crunching dry needles and pine cones, her eyes locked on the door like it might vanish if she blinked. June followed, slower, arms crossed, shoulders squared. Behind them, Sandra sat upright, color returned to her cheeks but her expression unreadable. She stared at the cabin with the gaze of a girl trying to find pieces of herself in the place that made her. They hadn't knocked. They hadn't spoken. They simply stood at the foot of the porch, 3 daughters, grown but bruised by the years, and waited for something to come out and name them. Callum stayed by the wagon. After a long stretch of silence, the door creaked open. A man stepped out, leaning heavily on a carved stick. He was thin, hollowed out. His beard was streaked with gray and gold, and his clothes hung from him like he'd borrowed them from someone stronger. But the eyes were unmistakable, clear, flint-colored, and full of stubborn light. Thomas Langley looked at his daughters and said nothing. Ada stepped forward first, slow and careful, as if approaching a wild thing. She stopped at the bottom stair. "We thought you were dead," she said. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "So did I." June's breath hitched. Sandra gripped Ada's skirt again, just like she had at the auction. Thomas looked at each of them in turn, his face unreadable. Then he sat down on the porch bench, breath wheezing just a bit. "You came." "We shouldn't have had to," June said. Her voice was sharp, but her hands trembled. "You didn't," he replied. "But I'm glad you did." Ada's voice softened. "Did you send someone?" He nodded. Name was Carter. Trapper. Said he passed through Welton, could carry a message. "He did," Callum said from behind them. "Eventually." Thomas turned toward the voice, squinting into the light. "And who are you?" Callum stepped forward, hands resting lightly on his belt. "Just the one who made sure they got here." Thomas studied him a moment. Then, with effort, he stood again and made his way down the porch step by step, until he reached Callum and held out his hand. "Then I owe you more than I can say." Callum shook it. "Don't owe me anything. Just tell them the truth." Thomas looked past him at the wagon, at the dust still clinging to his daughter's hems. "I would have come myself," he said, voice quieter now. "But I was fevered. Couldn't ride. Could barely breathe. I didn't know what she'd done. Your stepmother. I trusted her too long." "No one expects a dying man to rescue anyone," Ada said. "But we do expect him to know who he's left behind." He flinched like her words had a weight. "I was a fool. I buried your mother and didn't know what to do next. So I did nothing. That's how cowards live." Ada looked down. "We needed you." "I know." A long pause followed. Wind moved through the trees. Birds flitted from branch to branch, as if too polite to interrupt. June stepped forward at last, arms tight across her chest. "You look small," she said. "Like the man we remembered just stepped out of your skin." Thomas smiled faintly. "I suppose I am smaller now. But I hope what's left is worth keeping." He turned toward the cabin, then paused. "Come in. Please. All of you." They followed. Slowly. Together. The inside was humble. One main room, a small kitchen space, two narrow beds, a fireplace built from river stones. It smelled of smoke, sage and thyme. A blanket draped over the back of a rocker. Shelves lined with tools and dried herbs. A table with 3 worn chairs, one replaced with a crate. Thomas gestured. It ain't much. But it's what I got left. Ada moved to the hearth, knelt, and stirred the coals. You've kept it warm. Didn't want the cold to take it all. Sandra sat at the edge of one bed and looked around with wide, unsure eyes. It's quiet. It's been too quiet, Thomas said. A man loses his girls, he hears every silence louder. Callum stood by the door, letting them fill the space before him. Thomas turned toward him again. You really brought them all this way? Callum nodded. Why? I gave my word. That all? Callum met his eyes. Sometimes that's enough. Thomas looked at Ada, then June. Did he treat you well? June surprised them all. He didn't try to fix us. He just carried us. That seemed to move Thomas more than any gratitude. They ate a simple meal that night. Flatbread. Beans. Dried meat. The kind of supper made when a man lives alone too long. But no one complained. They ate slowly. The kind of slow that comes when something once shattered is trying to remember how to hold its shape. Ada helped clean. June rearranged the chairs. Sandra found a loose board in the floor that still squeaked like it did when they were children, and laughed for the first time in days. As the sun set, Callum stepped out onto the porch, leaning against the post. Thomas joined him after a while, hands clasped behind his back. You're not just a writer, Thomas said. You've got stillness in you. I used to be a lot of things, Callum replied. Now I'm mostly quiet. Thomas nodded. There's use in that. He looked toward the woods, toward the dark. They'll be all right now, he said. Won't they? Callum didn't answer right away. They're strong, he said at last. But strength ain't enough. They need a place to rest. To choose what comes next. Without someone forcing their hand. Thomas's jaw tightened. I gave up my right to lead them. Then don't lead. Just walk beside him. Inside, Ada tucked a blanket around Sandra, then rose and walked out into the night. She paused beside Callum, folding her arms against the chill. He's different, she said. Callum nodded. So are you. She turned to look at him. Will you stay? He didn't speak. I'm not asking for forever, she said. I just don't want the quiet to feel hollow again. He met her eyes. I'll stay as long as I'm welcome. Behind them, the cabin glowed with lantern light. June was humming something old. Thomas had pulled out a wooden box from under the bed, and was holding a faded ribbon in his hands like it was made of breath. Ada looked out toward the dark and whispered, This place feels like it stopped waiting. Callum touched the brim of his hat. Then maybe it's time it started living. She didn't say anything more. But she stood beside him, and the wind didn't feel cold. Tomorrow would bring decisions. Rebuilding. Maybe goodbye. But tonight, something sacred had been returned. Not fixed. Not perfect. Just forgiven. The sun rose soft over the Langley cabin, turning the dew silver on the grass and staining the trees with honey-colored light. Birds sang. A fox slunk by the tree-line and vanished. The land looked gentle, as if it had forgotten the storms that once lived there. Inside the house, a slow bustle had begun, not hurried, not loud, but purposeful, as though the space itself was stretching awake after years of being held too tight. 3 days had passed since the sisters returned home. In that time, the silence of the cabin had changed. No longer hollow, it now carried weight. The scrape of chairs being moved, soft laughter that echoed like remembered lullabies, the clink of cups, the shuffle of feet. Thomas Langley, pale but stronger, now moved without the cane during short hours of the day. His face, still sunken in places, had filled slightly with the kind of life that comes when purpose returns. He no longer sat by the fire all day. Instead, he walked the land behind the cabin in the early mornings, dragging a rake or hammer or rope just for the feel of usefulness. Ada had taken over the hearth, not out of obligation but instinct. June had found herself drawn to the shed, where her stubbornness found peace in straightening tools, stacking firewood, fixing hinges. And Sandra, bright-eyed once more, spent hours by the creek, talking to the sky like she'd been waiting years to tell it her stories. Callum had not left. He hadn't unpacked either. His bedroll still sat by the door, and his saddlebags remained just within reach. But each morning he fetched water, chopped wood, mended fences. He didn't ask for a place. He simply took care of the ones who lived there. Then came the letter. Ryder passed through from Fort Ray, bringing a parcel wrapped in oilskin, and a folded envelope scrawled in the familiar hand of the Welton preacher. Thomas opened it with shaking fingers, and when he'd finished reading, he laid it on the table and sat very still. Ada picked it up. She read the words, her mouth a firm line. "They're asking if it's true," she said. "If we were sold. If we're alive. If we've come home." "They heard," June muttered from the doorway. "Course they heard. That town lives off gossip." Ada didn't speak. Then Thomas said slowly, "They want to send a witness. The preacher says there's been talk of scandal. That the marriage ledgers are unclear. That the stepmother claimed we were lost, runaways, dangerous. He wants to know if things should be set right." Sandra looked up from her stool. "What does that mean?" Thomas looked to his daughters and then to Callum and said, "It means we can either stay silent, or we can make the story louder than the lie." That night the fire burned low, but no one wanted sleep. The sisters sat together on the rug, their shoulders touching. Callum leaned by the wall, arms crossed, eyes closed, though listening. Thomas sat at the table, running his thumb over the edge of his mug. "We won't go back," June said. "I won't step foot in Welton." "You won't have to," Ada said. "We don't owe them anything." "But we owe ourselves the truth," Thomas said. "And so do the women in that town. The girls who think they're alone." Silence settled again. Then Ada spoke, slowly. "Then let's give them something they can't ignore." The next morning, the preacher arrived, dusty and apologetic. He'd ridden hard, it seemed, chasing rumors up the mountain. Thomas met him with calm grace and handed over the letter, and the old deed Callum had used in the auction. "She lied," Thomas said, "about everything. And I let her. Now I'm done letting others speak for my house." The preacher blinked. "I don't know what you want of me." Ada stepped forward. "We want a ceremony." "For forgiveness?" "For naming," Ada said. "And for witness. We're not hiding anymore." They planned it in the open air, with wildflowers gathered in tin pails, and linens washed and strung between pines. There was no talk of dowries, no matchmaking. No men claiming hands like property. This was not about marriage in the common sense. This was about reclamation. 3 weddings, yes, but not to husbands. June married her own rage, stood tall, and let go of the shame stitched into her back. She stood barefoot beneath the trees, and read aloud the names of every woman she knew who had been silenced. The wind caught her words and carried them like prayer. No man took her hand that day, but every girl in earshot stood taller after. Sandra married her voice. She wore her mother's shawl and recited, soft but clear, a story she had written about a bird that lived through the snow. She sang the lullaby Ada once used, but made it hers, and even the preacher wiped his eyes. She danced alone in the grass, and when it was done, she kissed her father's cheek and whispered, "I think I'll be a writer." Ada's was last. She did not stand under branches or speak into the wind. She walked to Callum, who stood near the edge of the field, coat off, shirt sleeves rolled, as if unsure if he was meant to stay. She reached for his hand. He looked at her, every scar of his life visible in his stillness. "I'm not asking you to stay forever," Ada said. "But I've spent a long time waiting for a man who didn't run from a woman who carries weight." Callum didn't answer. He just stepped forward, took her hand in his, and laid it over his heart. She nodded. They didn't kiss, didn't speak vows. But when she turned to the gathered souls and said, "This is the man who walked us home," the clearing went still with reverence. The preacher stepped forward. "You sure?" We're not marrying each other, Ada said. We're choosing each other. Then that's enough, the preacher said. In the eyes of God and anyone worth knowing, that's enough. There was no feast. Just stew, fresh bread, wild berries in tin cups, laughter and stories. A fiddle played by an old friend of Thomas's, who'd wandered up the trail when he heard the songs. Neighbors came. Not many but enough. Some brought small gifts, blankets, flour, honey. Some came to see if the rumors were true. All left quieted by what they'd witnessed. That night, Callum sat on the porch, watching the sky. It was wide and black, stars scattered like fire sparks across an endless roof. Ada came beside him, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Still don't feel real, she murmured. It is. You ever think we'd end up here? Callum smiled faintly. No. She leaned into him. Me neither. He didn't ask what came next. He didn't press her for promises. But when she reached for his hand again, he held it like a man who knew its weight. Inside, Thomas fell asleep by the fire. Sandra wrote in her book. June sat with her boots off, humming. The cabin, once hollow, breathed. Weeks passed. Callum stayed. He fixed the roof, taught Sandra to shoot a rifle proper, helped June plant onions and tomatoes along the southern slope. Ada worked the ledgers, bartered at nearby farms, baked until the house smelled like something it hadn't since before grief took it. No papers were signed. No towns were involved. But the Langley place became known. Known for the women who returned. For the man who stayed. And for the truth that bloomed there. People came, young women mostly. Some bruised. Some curious. Some carrying babies or scars or stories they hadn't spoken aloud yet. And the sisters made space for them. Not as saviors. Just as witnesses. Callum was quiet through it all. He didn't speak much. But he built a bunkhouse. He kept watch at night. He found lost horses. And once, when a runaway girl cried in her sleep, he sat by the door and said nothing until she woke calm. One day, as winter leaned close, Ada found him splitting wood in the frost. She stood there a moment, watching. You could leave, she said. I know. You still haven't unpacked. I know. Why? Callum leaned on the axe. Looked at her. Because some part of me thought you'd ask me to. I won't, she said. You can stay or go. You're already part of us. He nodded. Then, quietly, I don't want to go. She stepped closer. Then don't. He dropped the axe. They stood in the hush of snow. Two people who had once lived in pieces, now holding something whole. There was no need for grand endings. Just the steady truth of love that arrived not in thunder, but in footsteps across a porch. Sometimes the West tells stories in bullets and blood. And sometimes, if you listen close, it whispers of a man who walked 3 women out of silence, and stayed long enough to see them bloom. Those are the tales that last. The ones that begin where the noise ends. And the wind, passing through old pine, still carries their names.